At 6 a.m., while the sky over Eden Prairie was still dim, Jennifer Wilson was already preparing for the morning in her apartment. The aroma of pancakes wafted from the kitchen, spreading through the quiet apartment. Even during the rushed morning hours before work, she never neglected breakfast preparation. Emily took out her sketchbook. She said she had been drawing constantly during the 3 days at the hotel. "I drew this." In the sketchbook was a drawing of Lake Riley at dusk. The calm lake surface, the row of trees, and 2 figures. The silhouettes of mother and daughter illuminated by the sunset. "You know, I always believed. I believed you would definitely find me." At those words, Jennifer held her daughter tightly. Lake Riley's surface glimmered in the sunset. Unlike 3 days ago, it was a light filled with hope. A week later, the court completely revoked Robert's parental rights, restricting his visitation rights as well. Along with Carol, he would face severe sentencing. Life in Eden Prairie returned to normal. However, the events of those 3 days had definitely brought changes to people's hearts. Emily still spent her afternoons at Margaret's house as always. But now, Jennifer was always there too. The time spent across 3 generations fostered new bonds. At Lake Riley, Thomas the fisherman still cast his line today. Watching the morning sun reflected on the lake's surface, he remembered that day. Life has encounters that could be called either coincidence or destiny. Those small encounters can sometimes save precious lives. Emily's drawing still hangs in Margaret's living room. The lake, and the silhouettes of mother and daughter. There was a small note written on it. "To Mom, whom I love so much." Next to it, another drawing had been added. 3 silhouettes. Mother, daughter, and grandmother. The sunset at Lake Riley gently embraced their 3 shadows. Time to wake up. Walking toward her daughter's room, Jennifer checked her reflection in the mirror. Her khaki pantsuit projected the confidence of one of the area's top real estate agents. She had a major property contract scheduled for today. A year had passed since they started their new life at Eden Park Apartments, and she was gradually getting used to balancing work and childcare. "Mom, don't forget my paint set today." "Yes, it's already in your bag. This morning we're having blueberry pancakes." Relieved by her mother's words, Emily sat down at the table. A 4th grader at Eden Prairie Elementary School, she was a serious and quiet child who lit up during art class. She was an excellent student, well trusted by her teachers. Every time Jennifer watched her 10-year-old daughter maintain her cheerful demeanor despite her parents' divorce, she felt a tightness in her chest. After breakfast, the 2 got into the car as usual. Outside the window, the refreshing early summer morning scenery spread before them. "Grandma will pick you up after school as usual." "Yes. We're going to make cookies today. Will you come and have some, Mom?" "I'm sorry, I have paperwork to handle after the contract signing." Margaret's house was in a quiet residential area of Eden Prairie. Drawing from her experience as a former elementary school teacher, Margaret took great joy in looking after her granddaughter. She was also actively involved with Eden Prairie United Methodist Church, earning the community's trust through her weekend volunteer activities. While she had strong affection for her son Robert, it wasn't blind devotion. She was a kind grandmother who cherished her time with her granddaughter. After dropping her daughter off at school, Jennifer found herself thinking about 2 years ago as she drove to the real estate office. Robert's behavior began to change when a major project started at his IT company. Despite his polished appearance, he had an indecisive personality that lacked decisiveness, and he seemed overwhelmed by the pressure when promotion talks began. As overtime increased and weekend work became common, rumors started circulating at the workplace. He began to notice Carol Smith from the planning department. She was an ambitious woman who dressed in luxury brands and armed herself with perfect makeup. Having previously worked as a secretary, she had become a central figure in the department, notable for her flashy self-promotion on social media. A year later, after countless discussions, the couple decided to separate. Jennifer received custody of Emily, and they agreed that Margaret would look after her during weekday afternoons. Every other weekend was set aside for time with her father, and Jennifer would quietly watch as her daughter departed with a slightly tense expression, saying, "I'm going now." Robert had once been a good husband and father. On weekends, they would walk around Lake Riley as a family, spending happy moments praising Emily's drawings. It had been 12 years since their wedding at Redstone American Grill near Target headquarters. Back then, no one could have imagined a day like this would come. Arriving at the office, Jennifer made final checks on today's contract documents. She was highly regarded for her work, with strong client trust. Even after the divorce, she had moved forward, building a new life. Early summer in Eden Prairie. Peaceful days flowed by as usual. "Jennifer, could you check the Green Lake Villas contract?" At 2 p.m., her colleague Susan called out to her. The major property contract had concluded successfully, and Jennifer's expression showed satisfaction. More property files were stacked on her desk. "Here you go." As she handed over the documents, she quickly checked her smartphone. There was no message from Emily. Usually, there would always be a message saying, "I arrived at Grandma's house," around the time school ended. Had school just ended? Looking at the clock, it showed 2:15 p.m. The bell signaling the end of the school day rang across Eden Prairie Elementary School's grounds. The early June sunlight already carried hints of summer, casting long shadows of children against the school building walls. "Emily, your father's here." Her classmate Caitlin called from the classroom doorway. Robert stood in the hallway in a suit. Emily felt slightly confused. This wasn't their usual visitation day. "Dad?" "Emily, this is sudden, but..." Robert's voice sounded a bit higher than usual, seeming unsettled. "Starting today, we're going on a little trip." "Did you tell Mom?" "I've already talked to her." "You don't need to go to Grandma's house." Emily felt an instinctive unease at these words. Her cautious nature, inherited from her mother, made her wary of her father's unusual behavior. However, she had never doubted him before. Returning to the classroom, Emily hurriedly packed her bag. As she picked up her paint set, she remembered her mother's warm voice checking it that morning. After hesitating, just as she reached for her smartphone. "We need to hurry. Carol's waiting." Emily's hand froze at her father's words. The moment she heard Carol's name, anxiety spread through her chest. Carol's loud laughter and forceful way of speaking remained an unpleasant memory in Emily's mind. As she left school, Emily looked back with reluctance. The twilight sky visible from the art room window seemed to be dyed a deeper blue than usual. "Oh, Jennifer." Robert already picked up Emily. When Jennifer visited Margaret's house after 5 p.m., such casual words greeted her. Margaret stood at the entrance bathed in the evening sun, setting aside her knitting. It took several seconds for the meaning of those words to sink in. "What?" Robert did. "Yes," he said something about a sudden trip. "I haven't heard anything about this." Jennifer's voice trembled. She took out her smartphone and dialed Robert's number. The ring tone echoed futilely before switching to voicemail. Next, she tried calling Emily's phone. However, it appeared to be powered off. "What time did he pick her up?" "Let me see. I believe it was around 2:30 p.m. He said he was going to pick her up directly from school, which was unusual." The moment she heard those words, warning bells rang in Jennifer's mind. Normally, they always communicated in advance about Emily's pick-up and drop-off arrangements. This was one of the most important agreements in their post-divorce arrangements. I need to call the police." Jennifer operated her smartphone with trembling fingers. Margaret, too, began to realize the gravity of the situation, her face changing color. 911, emergency services. My ex-husband took her without permission." The responding officer's voice was calm. "What's your daughter's name?" "Emily Wilson. She's 10 years old. Please provide details about your ex-husband." As she answered the questions, anxiety amplified within Jennifer. Outside the window, dusk was creeping over Eden Prairie. The sunset reflecting on Lake Riley's surface cast an ominous red light. "I apologize, but in cases of potential parental abduction, we need a 24-hour observation period." Jennifer's expression froze at the officer's words. 24 hours. How far could they drive in that time? How distant could they get? But something's different this time. Something's wrong. Her desperate plea couldn't overcome procedural barriers. After hanging up, Jennifer collapsed into a chair in Margaret's living room. Emily's drawings on the wall seemed about to cry. What could Robert be thinking? There was no answer to Margaret's whispered words. Only the clocks ticking echoed in the room. Lake Riley was shrouded in thick fog before dawn. An unseasonable chill for June enveloped the area along with the mist rising from the lake's surface. Though it had just turned 5 a.m., Thomas, an elderly fisherman, was already casting his line from his usual spot. Having lived in the area for over 50 years, he knew this lake better than anyone. This day too, he sat in his usual place on the east side of the lake, under a large willow tree. Through the morning haze, the trees on the opposite shore wavered like mysterious shadow puppets. Thomas's gaze, focused on his fishing rod tip, was suddenly drawn to something unusual on the lake's surface. Through the fog, an unnatural shadow floated. At first, he thought it was a large piece of driftwood, but upon closer inspection, "It can't be." With trembling hands, he took out his smartphone and dialed 911. About 30 minutes later, 2 police cars had already arrived at the scene. Officers were assessing the situation, casting flashlight beams across the lake's surface. As the fog gradually lifted, the outline of a submerged car became clearly visible. Checking the license plate. Dark blue Toyota Camry. The radio crackled intermittently. One officer reviewed the kidnapping report from the previous night. Meanwhile, Jennifer had spent the night at Margaret's house without sleeping. Friends had split up to search city hotels, and social media calls for information had been posted. However, no decisive leads had emerged. "Are you Jennifer Wilson?" The doorbell rang just after 6 a.m. Two police officers stood there. Their expressions seemed shadowed by something dark. "We found your husband's vehicle at Lake Riley." At those words, something froze in Jennifer's mind. Beside her, Margaret let out a small cry. "What about Emily?" "Rescue teams are heading to the scene now. Please come with us immediately." Even as they got into the patrol car, Jennifer couldn't shake the image of her daughter's smile from her mind. The expression from yesterday morning when she waved goodbye saying, "See you later." That gentle smile, just like always. When they arrived at Lake Riley, reporters had already begun to gather. Emergency vehicle sirens wailed ominously through the morning mist. Onlookers were starting to gather at the lakeside, with police officers setting up cordons to secure the scene. Beginning vehicle inspection. The diver's voice came through the radio. Each word squeezed Jennifer's heart tighter. Margaret made the sign of the cross in what looked like prayer. "The vehicle is empty." At that report, Jennifer nearly collapsed to her knees. Was it relief or new anxiety? Emotions tangled complexly. Backpack discovered in the back seat. Reports kept coming from the rescue team. Eventually, Emily's paint set and an unfamiliar silk scarf were recovered from the raised vehicle. The pale blue scarf was from a luxury brand. "That scarf." Margaret whispered softly. Jennifer recognized it too. It looked similar to one Carol Smith usually wore. A near-certain suspicion began to grow in both their minds. The investigators began carefully examining the car. DNA forensics experts had arrived, and detailed evidence collection from the vehicle interior began. Photography and sample collection continued around the recovered vehicle. Found a gas station receipt. Fueling record from yesterday at 3 p.m. at a Shell station in suburban Minneapolis. The detective nodded at the investigator's report. A new investigative lead had emerged. Check the surveillance camera footage. Collect all video from nearby gas stations, pharmacies, everything. The detective's orders flew. The forensics team had also arrived and began examining traces left on the vehicle. Tire tracks, brake marks, all information could be crucial clues. By then, local news breaks had begun reporting the incident. Suspicious vehicle discovered at Lake Riley, investigating connection to kidnapping. 10-year-old girl missing, possible paternal abduction. News helicopters began circling overhead. More onlookers gathered at the lakeside, with police officers desperately preventing people from trying to film the scene with smartphones. "Mrs. Wilson." A young female detective approached. A name tag reading Sarah Martin shone on her chest. "From the surveillance footage, we estimate the car entered the lake around 11 p.m. last night. However, we believe Emily was transferred to a different vehicle before that." At those words, light returned to Jennifer's eyes. She's alive. Emily's alive. Yes. And we suspect involvement from a woman named Carol Smith. Could you tell us more about her? As the sun completely dispelled the fog and the lake's surface began to shine, a command center was established and a large-scale search began. Not only local police but FBI agents had arrived, launching a full investigation into the kidnapping. A quiet morning in Eden Prairie. Lake Riley's surface now calmly reflected the sunlight. However, the truth submerged beneath its deep blue waters had not yet fully come to light. Only the lakeside willow tree silently watched the bustling movement of investigators. 72 hours after the car's discovery at Lake Riley, people gathered at Eden Prairie United Methodist Church to pray for Emily's safety. The prayer meeting, called for by Margaret, drew not only Eden Prairie residents but also nearby residents who had learned of the incident through social media. Jennifer sat quietly in the very back row of the church, eyes closed. She had barely slept these past 3 days. She had cooperated with FBI questioning, provided information about Carol Smith, and responded to media inquiries as much as possible. In her mind, she constantly felt she could hear Emily's voice. "Mom, it's okay." Like her daughter whispering beside her. She had been encouraged many times by this voice, somewhere between hallucination and reality. A large screen set up in the chapel displayed Emily's smiling photograph. The image of the 10-year-old girl proudly showing her art class drawing brought tears to the participants' eyes. Just then, the chapel doors quietly opened. A detective hurried toward Jennifer. "Mrs. Wilson, we have information." The voice sounded higher than usual, somehow filled with hope. "We received a report of a girl matching Emily's description in Duluth, northern Minnesota. A Holiday Inn employee called it in." Her heartbeat quickened. Duluth. The port city on Lake Superior. About 3 hours by car from Eden Prairie. Local police are heading there now for confirmation. "Let's go too." As they were leaving the chapel, Margaret rushed over. "I'm coming too." Her voice was filled with determination. In the Holiday Inn employee break room, Katie the employee was explaining the day's events to the police officer. "That parent and child had concerned me since yesterday evening." The woman seemed restless, checking her mobile phone repeatedly. But what was decisive was this morning. Early morning, while Katie was working the front desk, the girl came down to the lobby alone. "Excuse me." The girl spoke to Katie in a small voice. "I'm Emily Wilson. Did you see the news?" At that moment, pieces connected in Katie's mind. The kidnapping case from last night's local news. Just as she was about to call the police on the back office phone, the elevator chimed. "Emily. What are you doing?" A woman's voice mixed with panic. Katie maintained her composure while activating her mobile phone camera. The FBI and local police joint team arrived at the Holiday Inn just after noon. The hotel was already completely sealed off, with SWAT on standby. As radio communications flew back and forth, Jennifer and the others waited in a police vehicle. The clock hands seemed exceptionally slow. About 10 minutes after the raid began, the radio crackled. 2 suspects secured. Girl confirmed safe. At those words, tears flowed from the eyes of all three waiting in the car. When they rushed into the hotel lobby, Emily was already there waiting. Accompanied by a female FBI agent, holding a hot chocolate. Mother and daughter embraced wordlessly. "I'm sorry, you must have been scared." "It's okay. I did what you taught me, Mom." The FBI agent's expressions showed surprise at Emily's composed responses. A level of judgment unexpected in a 10-year-old. It was undoubtedly a quality inherited from her mother. During questioning, the full picture of the incident emerged. Carol Smith had been planning to move to Florida. She intended to start a new life in Miami, where her family lived. And she had drawn Robert into her plans. But they realized their plan wouldn't work without me. Emily quietly explained. Carol said that if I was there, Mom would definitely come after me. Then Mom would have to come to Florida too. The self-centered plan crumbled due to the quick thinking of a 10-year-old girl. Emily had faithfully executed the emergency procedures her mother had taught her. They turned off my smartphone, but Mom taught me there would always be opportunities in hotels. The police arrested Robert and Carol on kidnapping charges. Emily's testimony, the hotel's security camera footage, and the video Katie captured became decisive evidence. That evening at dusk, Jennifer and Emily stood by Lake Riley's shore. Margaret was offering prayers of thanks at the church. "Mom, look." Emily took out her sketchbook. She said she had been drawing constantly during the 3 days at the hotel. "I drew this." In the sketchbook was a drawing of Lake Riley at dusk. The calm lake surface, the row of trees, and 2 figures. The silhouettes of mother and daughter illuminated by the sunset. "You know, I always believed. I believed you would definitely find me." At those words, Jennifer held her daughter tightly. Lake Riley's surface glimmered in the sunset. Unlike 3 days ago, it was a light filled with hope. A week later, the court completely revoked Robert's parental rights, restricting his visitation rights as well. Along with Carol, he would face severe sentencing. Life in Eden Prairie returned to normal. However, the events of those 3 days had definitely brought changes to people's hearts. Emily still spent her afternoons at Margaret's house as always. But now, Jennifer was always there too. The time spent across 3 generations fostered new bonds. At Lake Riley, Thomas the fisherman still cast his line today. Watching the morning sun reflected on the lake's surface, he remembered that day. Life has encounters that could be called either coincidence or destiny. Those small encounters can sometimes save precious lives. Emily's drawing still hangs in Margaret's living room. The lake, and the silhouettes of mother and daughter. There was a small note written on it. "To Mom, whom I love so much." Next to it, another drawing had been added. 3 silhouettes. Mother, daughter, and grandmother. The sunset at Lake Riley gently embraced their 3 shadows.